Hi, First Presbyterian. With December arriving, the year 2020 is coming to an end. I'm tempted to add onto the end of that statement, and good riddance, but I won't. As much as this past year has had its share of upheaval and heartache, there have been moments of joy and hope along the way. For me, being called as your new pastor is certainly high on that list. For you, maybe it's less clear where the joy and hope have been. Whatever your experience has been, I pray that our theme for Advent this year will be meaningful for you and bring you closer to Christ. This year, our theme will be Advent in Exile. Each Sunday during worship, Pastor Jacobson and I will be preaching from the lectionary, which focuses on the experiences of God's people in exile in Babylon. To people in exile, the prophet Isaiah offers words of hope and promise. You might recognize these familiar words from the prophet Isaiah in chapter 61, verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners. In the New Testament, Jesus said those words from Isaiah are fulfilled in him. As Christians, we believe all the hopes and desires of God's people that we read about in the Hebrew Scriptures are ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. Their hope was delivered to them in exile with the promise of Jesus. And yet, generations later, when Jesus finally arrived, the people are still in desperate circumstances. Many of them were living in their own land again, but under Roman military occupation. And nevertheless, God's promise had been given to them. Brothers and sisters, this Advent will feel a bit like exile for us. It will be different, disappointing, and disorienting. Even still, the hope and promise of Christmas stands, because the hope and promise of Christmas will never die. Thank God for phones and tablets that keep us connected to our families and loved ones. Thank God for hospital and care center staff who can read our notes and letters to our loved ones. And thank God for live-streamed worship services that help us to remain connected together as we worship. Admittedly, none of those things are what we expected or really want. But isn't that part of the Christmas story? Into an impoverished family living at a precarious time in history, a fragile baby was born. That's the beginning of the story of how Jesus overcame the world. There is hope for you because of Jesus. Our story doesn't end with COVID. This is only a few stanzas in a much larger epic poem. This Advent, open up Matthew chapters 1 and 2 and Luke chapter 2 and read them and hold on to the everlasting hope of Christmas.